They say World War II was the most documented conflict in human history. Yet somehow, the closer you look, the more you realize how much was hidden, erased, or never taught. Not because the stories weren't important, but because the war was too big, too monstrous, too chaotic for any one generation to fully capture. Most people know the big moments: Pearl Harbor, D-Day, Hiroshima. But the real story of WWII isn't just carved in monuments or shown in grainy black and white documentaries. It's buried in forgotten diaries, classified military reports, and archives that only recently became unsealed. It's found in the strange, unbelievable, and almost impossible events that shaped the war behind the scenes. And once you hear them, you'll never see WW2 the same way again. Before we go deeper, if you love real war history, forgotten facts, and the untold side of global conflict, make sure you tap that subscribe button for more powerful stories brought to life. It helps this channel reach more people who crave the truth behind the headlines. Now, let's rewind the clock. Imagine the world in 1939, nations trembling, militaries arming, leaders making decisions that would reshape the future of humanity. But behind the obvious events, strange things were happening, things that almost sound fictional until you realize historians have verified every one of them. For example, did you know the first shot fired by American forces in World War II wasn't in Europe and it wasn't in the Pacific? In fact, it happened before the US even officially entered the war. It happened when a nervous American destroyer, the USS Ward, spotted a mysterious submarine near Pearl Harbor hours before the air attack even began. The ship opened fire, one well-aimed shot into the Pacific waves, and hit a Japanese mini-submarine trying to sneak into the harbor. That means the very first American shot of World War II happened during an event the world thought was a surprise attack. But here's where the story gets even more bizarre. The report from the USS Ward describing the sinking of the mini-sub was delivered to naval headquarters in Hawaii. And then it sat, unread, unacted upon, buried under administrative confusion. Had it been taken seriously, the entire course of American history might have changed. Maybe aircraft would have been scrambled, maybe defenses activated, maybe the loss of life reduced. But as fate would have it, the message didn't reach the right hands in time. It was the first sign of a pattern that would repeat throughout the war, critical information arriving just moments too late. But that was far from the last strange event of the conflict. The deeper you go, the stranger World War II becomes. Take the incredible disappearance of entire battalions, the unexplainably fast shifts in battlefield momentum, or the bizarre psychological weapons both sides experimented with. There are things most history textbooks skip entirely, like the time the US Air Force trained bats to deliver incendiary bombs. Yes, real bats. The plan, called Project X-Ray, was simple. Strap miniature explosives to thousands of bats, release them over Japanese cities at dawn, and let them roost under wooden rooftops. The resulting fires would have caused catastrophic damage. And here's the scary part. It actually worked. During tests, the bats escaped and accidentally burned down parts of an American airbase. But America's strange experiments didn't stop there. There was also the Ghost Army, a top-secret U.S. unit armed with inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, sound effects, and elaborate illusions. Their job was deception, misleading German intelligence at every turn. And it worked. They fooled enemy reconnaissance again and again, convincing the Nazis of fake invasions, fake divisions, fake tank battalions. One of their operations saved thousands of Allied soldiers using nothing but rubber tanks and speakers, blasting recorded engine noises. Yet the strangest part is this. The Ghost Army remained classified until the 1990s. Meaning for almost 50 years, these men received no recognition for one of the most brilliant military tricks in history. But while some secrets were clever, others were horrifying. You've probably heard that World War II was the deadliest conflict ever. But what most people don't know is how shockingly uneven and unpredictable the casualties were. In some battles, soldiers had a better chance of survival storming beaches under machine gun fire than they did sitting safely behind the front lines. Why? Because disease, starvation, freezing temperatures, and exhaustion killed more soldiers in some regions than enemy bullets ever did. On the Eastern Front, winters reached temperatures so brutal that rifles froze, boots hardened like bricks, and wounded soldiers died not from their injuries, but from the cold, before medics could reach them. Many letters recovered from Soviet archives describe nights so cold that soldiers slept in trenches with their weapons inside their coats, afraid the metal would freeze to their skin. But the cold wasn't the only unseen killer. In the jungles of the Pacific, American, Japanese, and Australian troops fought not just each other, but nature itself. Soldiers reported leeches as long as fingers, diseases that struck overnight, snakes hiding inside helmets, and mosquitoes so vicious they were described as a second enemy. Some U.S. Marines said that during the Guadalcanal campaign, they feared malaria more than bullets. And still, nature wasn't the strangest part. What about the terrifying truth behind wartime technology? Many people don't know that Germany was only months, possibly weeks, away from developing long-range rocket weapons capable of striking New York City. The V-2 rockets that devastated London were prototypes for something much bigger. Declassified documents show plans for a Super V, a missile powerful enough to cross the Atlantic and hit American soil. If Germany had mass-produced them, the United States would have been dragged into a catastrophic homeland battle unlike anything ever imagined. But perhaps the most astonishing war fact involves something almost no documentary ever mentions. World War II had a moment where an entire day went missing. Not metaphorically, literally. On the international calendar, there is a 24-hour period in 1945 where some countries jumped forward an entire day to align with new wartime time zone changes. Troops fighting in the Pacific wrote in their diaries that they went to sleep on Sunday and woke up on Tuesday. For many soldiers, that missing day became a symbol of the war itself, a reminder that time meant nothing when death could arrive at any moment. But we haven't even scratched the surface. Did you know Adolf Hitler never actually visited a single concentration camp during the war? Not once. Historians have confirmed this from both Allied and German records. He demanded reports, maps, photographs, but never went in person. It remains one of the strangest psychological mysteries of the 20th century, how a man responsible for such systematic cruelty avoided facing it directly. But Hitler wasn't the only leader with strange habits. Winston Churchill survived so many assassination attempts that intelligence agencies started joking that he was unkillable. He survived a targeted bombing, a near plane crash, multiple ambushes, and even a car accident during a blackout. It's almost as if history itself refused to continue without him. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the United States was facing its own bizarre challenges. American soldiers landed in Europe expecting to fight the German army. Instead, sometimes they found themselves fighting local weather conditions so brutal that tanks froze in place. In the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive, U.S. paratroopers endured temperatures below minus 20 degrees Celsius with almost no winter gear. Some soldiers burned their own rifles for heat, knowing they'd be court-martialed if officers found out. But what they discovered next was even harder to believe. During the same battle, German troops disguised themselves as Americans, wearing U.S. uniforms, driving captured American jeeps, and speaking English to infiltrate Allied lines. This caused such paranoia that American soldiers began quizzing each other on U.S. trivia to prove they weren't enemy agents. Soldiers were detained for not remembering baseball rules or the capital of certain states. World War II wasn't just a war of bullets and bombs, it was a war of confusion, deception, and psychological warfare. And some of the craziest stories didn't even happen on land. The oceans of WW2 were silent battlegrounds full of secrets that took decades to uncover. Did you know the longest naval battle of the entire war wasn't Pearl Harbor or Midway? It was the Battle of the Atlantic, a 6-year cat-and-mouse struggle between U.S., British, and German naval forces. German U-boats hunted Allied convoys like wolves, sometimes stalking a single ship for days before striking. But here's the part that still chills naval historians. Some of those U-boats stayed submerged long after the war ended. One submarine, U-530, surrendered in Argentina 2 months after Germany surrendered. Another, U-977, surfaced weeks later under mysterious circumstances. Rumors spread that high-ranking Nazis had escaped aboard them, a rumor that persists in conspiracy circles even today. And then there's the story of the ghost ship of the Pacific. In 1944, Allied pilots reported seeing a Japanese transport ship drifting with no crew. The vessel was intact, its cargo untouched, its decks undamaged, but every crew member had vanished. No signs of struggle, no distress signals, no bodies. The ship's fate remains unsolved to this day. But what happened next is even more unbelievable. One of the least known WW2 facts is that the United States once planned to invade Japan with a land operation so massive it would have made D-Day look small. The plan, codenamed Operation Downfall, involved millions of American soldiers storming Japanese beaches. The expected casualties were so high, hundreds of thousands, that the U.S. military secretly printed 500,000 Purple Heart medals in preparation. And here's the astonishing part. The United States is still awarding those medals today, from stockpiles created for a battle that never happened. This means the war you think you know, the war that shaped the modern world, was not only stranger than we were taught, but almost unimaginably different from the simplified version in most documentaries. Yet there is one story, one hidden truth from WW2 that overshadows them all. The world came far closer to a completely different ending than anyone realized. An ending that would have rewritten civilization. An ending that only a handful of people alive today even know about. And that story begins in a forgotten bunker. Deep beneath a city that was bombed so heavily, survivors describe the skies as black snow. But to understand that moment, the one that historians now claim could have changed the entire outcome of the war, we need to step into the shadows of a secret operation so deeply classified that some documents remain sealed even now. A mission involving American intelligence, a collapsing enemy empire, a decision that almost altered the fate of the world. The bunker was hidden beneath the ruins of a city that once glowed with life. Now it was little more than shattered stone and burning streets, echoing with distant artillery fire and the low thunder of tanks crawling through smoke-filled avenues. The war had erupted above them like a storm ripping apart the sky. But down here, in this underground chamber of maps and radio equipment, something far stranger was occurring. This is where the truth splinters away from the history books. Because if the events in this bunker had unfolded just a little differently, the war might have ended months earlier or continued years longer. And the fate of millions would have hung on a decision made by men who never fired a single shot. The operation was known only to a handful of Allied commanders and American intelligence officers. It began with a discovery so shocking that even top military strategists struggled to accept it. An intercepted communication indicated that a high-ranking Axis official, one deeply involved in military planning, was willing to defect. Not just defect, but deliver something that could shift the entire balance of World War II. Coordinates, blueprints, war strategies, and a weapon design that, according to reports, was being developed in secret laboratories hidden in mountains and forests across Europe. American intelligence couldn't ignore it. Not during a war where every advantage could mean saving thousands of soldiers. Not at a time when U.S. troops were fighting fierce battles across muddy fields, frozen forests, and island jungles. Not when the war machine of the Axis powers was still grinding forward. So a group of American operatives was dispatched, traveling through contested territory, their path lined with war debris, abandoned artillery shells, collapsed bridges, and the eerie silence of villages caught in the crossfire. They moved under cover of darkness, guided only by fragments of radio codes and the faint hope that the information was real. But no one expected what they found. The bunker was far larger than they imagined. An underground maze of hallways, reinforced steel doors, military documents, and communication lines still humming with activity. It was like stepping into the enemy's hidden nerve center. And standing in the middle of it, waiting with trembling hands, was the official who had risked everything to betray his side. He spoke quickly, urgently, terrified that the rumble of incoming tanks might collapse the ceiling above them. His voice shook as he explained what he had learned. He told the Americans something that even now, almost a century later, still sends chills through historians. He claimed the Axis had been building a doomsday weapon. Not a nuclear bomb, though the war's nuclear race was real. Not a chemical gas attack, although the threat haunted both sides. This was something else, a weapon designed not for destruction, but for collapse. A communications weapon capable of jamming Allied command lines across entire countries, one that could blind airplanes, silence radios, disrupt battlefield coordination, and make entire divisions vanish into chaos. A weapon that could erase the American command structure at the most critical moment. If activated, Allied forces landing in Europe could have lost all communication with each other. Generals would issue orders to soldiers who would never hear them. Tanks would advance without support. Air raids would strike empty fields. Naval bombardments would target the wrong positions. The official claimed the weapon was weeks, possibly days from readiness. And here is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. The Americans didn't know whether to trust him. It could have been a trap. It could have been misinformation. It could have been the most elaborate deception attempt of the war. But as they explored the bunker, they found documents that made their blood run cold. Blueprints, frequency charts, energy requirements, and the signature of scientists known to be working on other advanced wartime technologies. In that moment, the operatives realized the truth. If this weapon became operational, the Allied invasion of Europe might fail before it even began. What happened next has never been officially acknowledged by any government, but scattered notes, declassified pages, and testimony from aging veterans paint a chilling picture. The Americans ordered the bunker destroyed, not with grenades, not with dynamite, with precision charges laid along the entire underground structure, enough to collapse it forever. They escorted the defector out, pushing through rubble, dodging sniper fire and artillery bursts as the ground shook around them. Tanks rolled through the streets above, the sounds of war all around. Machine gun bursts, mortar explosions, soldiers shouting, aircraft engines roaring overhead. And then, with the press of a detonator, the bunker vanished. The explosion was so massive that it sent dust clouds pouring into the sky, briefly mistaken for another bombing run. Entire blocks of the ruined city shook as the underground complex imploded, burying the classified weapon under thousands of tons of debris and sealing its legacy in shadow. The Americans escaped with the defector. But the weapon? It was gone forever. This mission remained classified for decades. Why? Because America had barely survived having its Pacific Fleet destroyed at Pearl Harbor. Because Europe was drowning in combat. Because morale depended on the idea that victory was certain. And because revealing how close they came to losing communication across an entire continent would have shaken confidence in the Allied war effort. But this hidden story connects to another bizarre fact about WW2, one even less known. There were nearly 20 assassination attempts on Adolf Hitler by his own officers. 20. Yet every single one failed, for reasons historians still struggle to explain. Faulty triggers, unexpected schedule changes, bombs placed in the wrong rooms, a briefcase moved 2 inches, a plane delayed by fog. History books claim these failures were coincidences. But when you read the reports, the pattern becomes too strange to ignore. It almost feels like the war itself was resisting certain outcomes. And the Americans knew. British intelligence knew. The Soviet Union knew. They all understood that the world was hanging by a thread. And any shift, one bullet, one explosion, one successful assassination, could have altered the map of the world forever. But the oddities don't stop there. Most people don't know that the largest tank battle in human history wasn't fought between the US and Germany, or between Britain and the Axis. It was fought between the Soviet Union and Germany at the Battle of Kursk. Nearly 6,000 tanks, over 2 million soldiers, thousands of aircraft. A clash of steel so massive that the ground reportedly shook like an earthquake. But buried beneath the chaos was a secret advantage the Soviets possessed. They had broken German codes. They knew exactly where the German armored divisions would strike. They spent months digging minefields, anti-tank ditches, and layered defenses. The Germans walked into a perfectly orchestrated trap, one of the most devastating turning points of the entire war. Yet here's what makes it astonishing. Even with superior intelligence, maps, strategy, tanks, and manpower, the battle came terrifyingly close to swinging the other way. For days, the Soviets faced the possibility of complete collapse. If the Germans had broken through just one more defensive line, the Eastern Front might have shifted entirely. But they didn't. And that one missed opportunity changed history. Meanwhile, American forces were pushing across Europe, island hopping in the Pacific, and fighting brutal battles on land, sea, and air. Millions of US soldiers were confronting realities that textbooks rarely emphasize: the fear, the exhaustion, the constant uncertainty. Some soldiers described nights where the darkness felt alive. Some wrote about foxholes collapsing under artillery blasts. Some talked about seeing entire squads vanish in seconds when mortars landed too close. Some recalled the smell of wet earth mixed with gunpowder, the metallic tang of spent casings, and the tremble in their hands after firing a rifle nonstop for hours. But even in the middle of unimaginable violence, strange moments of humanity emerged. During the Battle of the Bulge, both American and German soldiers reportedly paused fighting momentarily during a blizzard so thick that visibility dropped to zero. Survivors said it felt like the war itself froze. And there are records of US medics treating German prisoners, German medics treating Americans, pilots on opposite sides saluting each other in the sky before opening fire, a split second of mutual respect before the brutality resumed. These contradictions, war and mercy, destruction and compassion, define the true story of World War II. Not just the battles, not just the victories, but the unpredictable, almost surreal events that shaped everything. And here we reach the most unsettling truth. There are still classified WW2 documents, still sealed, still redacted, still hidden, because certain operations, experiments, and decisions remain too sensitive for release. Why? Historians speculate that some reveal intelligence methods still in use. Others expose political agreements made in desperation. And some, according to hints from declassified memos, involve wartime actions that governments still cannot fully explain. But the most shocking fact of all is this. There are still WW2 battles that remain unconfirmed, still lost aircraft that have never been recovered, still unopened vaults in old European buildings filled with papers, artifacts, and coded materials. The war is over, but the secrets, they're still alive. Which leads us to the story most people never hear. In the dying days of the war, when cities burned and nations collapsed, a message was intercepted by Allied codebreakers. A message that didn't match any known military frequency. A message that came from a location no military unit claimed. A message that suggested someone, somewhere, was still fighting a battle that had already been lost. But to understand that final mystery, we need to unravel one more hidden truth. One that connects intelligence agencies, lost divisions, abandoned bunkers, and something buried deep in the heart of Europe. Because when the Allies reached the coordinates of that transmission, they found something chilling. A fortress, untouched, fully supplied, lights still on, but no soldiers, no officers, no bodies, just silence. And then, inside a locked cabinet, they found documents that suggested a scenario no one was prepared for. A plan that would have changed everything. The deeper you go into the shadows of World War II, the more you realize that some of the most unbelievable events never made it into school textbooks. Not because they were unimportant, but because they were so improbable, so chaotic, so deeply buried in classified files that historians needed decades to uncover them. And perhaps nowhere is this clearer than in the secret battles fought in frozen oceans, silent bunkers, and forgotten laboratories. Battles that shaped the fate of entire nations without a single newspaper headline. What many people don't realize is that beneath the thunder of artillery and the roar of tanks, there was an invisible war unfolding. A world of deception, psychological warfare, espionage, and scientific brinkmanship. It was a conflict fought not just with bullets, but with codes, machines, prototypes, and desperate gambles where the wrong decision could doom millions. Take the Arctic convoys, an image most people never associate with World War II. Imagine being on a trembling ship in pitch-black polar night, surrounded by ice fields, with German U-boats stalking beneath, and Luftwaffe bombers hunting overhead. The temperature was so cold that exposed skin froze in seconds, and men described the wind as a knife you couldn't escape. Yet these convoys were the lifeline that kept the Soviet Union alive. Without them, the Eastern Front might have collapsed. Most people will never know how many sailors vanished into that frozen water, lost forever, unmarked, unseen. But while the Arctic swallowed convoys whole, another threat lurked deep below the Atlantic surface. German U-boats, the wolf packs, roamed the ocean like silent predators. The submariners inside those steel tubes endured unimaginable conditions. Oxygen so low that candles flickered out, temperatures soaring as high as a furnace near the engines, the constant fear of depth charges detonating overhead. Some U-boat crews were at sea for months without surfacing. Others never returned at all. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't just a naval engagement. It was a war of starvation, a struggle to choke Britain into submission by cutting off everything from ammunition to medical supplies to food. Yet, even that wasn't the whole story. Few know that deep in the Polish countryside, decades before the world celebrated the Allied victory, 3 mathematicians began the work that would change the war. Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rojicki, and Henryk Zygalski, names that should be as famous as any general, were the first to decrypt the early Enigma codes. Without them, Bletchley Park might never have cracked the later, more complex versions. Without them, the Battle of Britain, the D-Day invasion, and the North African campaign might have unfolded very differently. Their contributions saved untold lives, yet their story was kept hidden for decades due to Cold War politics. But even as codebreakers worked in secrecy, another kind of soldier fought a war most people know nothing about: the Monuments Men. These weren't warriors with rifles. They were art historians, archaeologists, professors, men sent into combat zones to rescue Europe's cultural heritage before the Nazis could steal or destroy it. They tracked stolen paintings through bombed cities, searched abandoned mines loaded with explosives, and raced against retreating German units who had orders to burn everything. By the end of the war, they recovered millions of stolen artifacts. Without their bravery, some of humanity's greatest treasures would have vanished forever. Meanwhile, in the air, the skies were filled with machines that pushed technology to its limits. German engineers tested the world's first jet fighter, the Me-262, a plane so fast Allied pilots described it as impossible to catch. The V-2 rocket, the first long-range guided ballistic missile in history, fell on London with no warning, traveling faster than the speed of sound. And while German scientists built rockets, the United States launched the Manhattan Project, mobilizing physicists, chemists, engineers, and even Nobel Prize winners into a race that would change warfare forever. It's easy to forget how narrow some of these decisions were. One miscalculation, one miscommunication, and the course of history could have shifted in minutes. For example, not many people know that during the Battle of the Bulge, German soldiers disguised themselves as American MPs infiltrated U.S. lines. They switched road signs, spread false rumors, and created enough confusion that General Patton himself temporarily increased his personal security. The paranoia grew so intense that U.S. soldiers set up checkpoints where they asked incoming troops questions like, "Who won Mickey Mouse's girlfriend?" and "What's the capital of Illinois?" to catch German infiltrators who didn't know American pop culture. But even stranger is what happened inside a monastery in Monte Cassino, a place where ancient history and modern war collided. German troops fortified the hills beneath it, creating one of the deadliest defensive positions in Europe. The Allies spent months trying to break through, launching repeated assaults that cost thousands of lives. Yet the monastery itself, contrary to popular belief, was initially empty of German troops. It wasn't until after Allied bombs reduced it to rubble that German paratroopers moved in and turned the ruins into a fortress. A misunderstanding turned a cultural treasure into a battleground. Beneath all of this, in the shadows of occupied cities, resistance fighters risked everything. They derailed trains, sabotaged factories, passed intelligence to Allied command, and used underground printing presses to spread hope where fear dominated. Many were teenagers, some were elderly. All knew that getting caught meant torture or execution. Their bravery didn't just help win the war, it kept the idea of freedom alive in places where it had been crushed. What most viewers never hear is that World War II was also fought with sound. The United States used Ghost Army units, artists and sound engineers armed with inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, and speakers blasting pre-recorded battle noises. Entire German divisions repositioned themselves based on illusions. These deception operations saved thousands of Allied lives by misleading German intelligence. And despite the grim brutality of the war, moments of humanity still shone through. During the Christmas truce of earlier conflicts, soldiers shared cigarettes and sang carols. In World War II, similar unofficial ceasefires occasionally occurred, Brief pauses where opposing enemies silently agreed to allow wounded soldiers to be retrieved from no man's land. These moments, though rare, showed that even in the most extreme conditions, humanity could flicker like a fragile flame. But perhaps the greatest unknown story is the one involving a single suitcase recovered from a U-boat in 1944. Inside were documents detailing a German plan so bold and so dangerous that Allied intelligence initially refused to believe it. Codenamed Operation Caesar, it involved transporting advanced weapon components toward Japan. If successful, it might have changed the balance of power in the Pacific, but the submarine carrying the parts never reached its destination. To this day, no one knows for certain what occurred during its final hours beneath the waves. As the war approached its climax, battles intensified. The fighting in the Pacific became some of the most brutal in military history. On islands like Peleliu, Okinawa, and Iwo Jima, American Marines faced entrenched Japanese defenders who refused to surrender. The volcanic terrain, bunkers, and hidden tunnels turned every yard into a death trap. War correspondents described the smell of sulfur, the constant explosions, the eerie silence between barrages, and the haunting sight of soldiers emerging from caves like shadows. It was a conflict defined by fire, steel, and unimaginable endurance. And while battles raged across continents, another silent war raged in laboratories, one that scientists barely understood themselves. Biological research projects, chemical weapons tests, and desperate attempts to create miracle cures were conducted by various nations. Many of these projects were destroyed at the end of the war, their documents burned, their results hidden forever. Yet the final months of World War II contained one last twist, a coded message intercepted by Allied intelligence that referenced a wonder weapon. At the time, no one knew if it was real or propaganda. Some feared the Germans were preparing a chemical strike or another advanced prototype. Others believed it was psychological warfare designed to inspire fear. The truth was more complex, a mixture of desperation, ambition, and collapsing leadership. But for a brief moment, the world held its breath. The war was ending, but the secrets were only beginning. And the deeper historians dig, the more they uncover long-buried details. Operations that went unreported, technologies decades ahead of their time, decisions that could have changed the fate of millions.